Some stories start with a hero. This one starts with a boy the world had thrown away. His name was Tommy Garrett. He was 7 years old, and for 3 days his entire universe had been a dusty wooden crate pressed against the jailhouse wall. From there, he watched the town of Redemption Creek move on without him. Sheriff Morrison dragged drunks into cells. Reverend Walsh preached about salvation, but never offered a piece of bread. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, had looked at his dirty face and shut the door so hard the frame rattled. His Uncle Pete was dead. A stupid fight over cards in a saloon, and just like that, Tommy was an orphan. Again. The whispers followed him down the street like hungry dogs. Orphan boy, no family left, carries the same stain as his gambler uncle. But whispers don't fill a boy's stomach, and they sure don't keep him warm when the desert night sinks its teeth in. Sheriff Morrison finally noticed him, keys jangling like a warning. "Boy, you can't stay here forever," he said. The words weren't mean, but they weren't kind either. They were just tired, like Tommy was another problem to be solved and filed away. Tommy slid off the crate and let his feet carry him down Main Street. He was a ghost in his own life, invisible to the store owner with fresh bread, invisible to the churchgoers with their full bellies. He was 7 years old, and he knew, with the cold certainty of a gravestone, that the world had no place for him. And that's when he heard the shouting. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, a tight knot of anger and disgust. Tommy, small as he was, squeezed through the forest of legs. And then he saw her, a woman sitting in the dirt, her dress torn, a trickle of blood painting a path from her split lip. Her hair was a tangled mess, but when she looked up, her eyes, they were just like his. Hollow, empty, given up. "Scarlet me, you're a disgrace," the sheriff's wife spat. The other voices joined in, a chorus of judgment he knew all too well. It was the same tone they used for his uncle, the same tone they now used for him. The woman, Scarlet May, tried to stand. She swayed, a broken doll about to fall. No one moved. No one offered a hand, except Tommy. Without thinking, he darted forward. His small hand grabbed her arm, steadying her. The crowd went dead silent. You could have heard a feather drop in the dust. The orphan boy touching the fallen woman. Scarlet Me looked down at him, her green eyes wide with a surprise that mirrored his own. "Thank you, little one," she whispered. Her voice was rough, but gentle. It was the first kindness he'd felt in 3 days, and it spread through his chest like warm milk. "Get away from her, boy!" Reverend Walsh's voice boomed. He stepped forward, clutching his Bible like a shield. "That woman is poison." But Tommy didn't move. He looked up at Scarlet May, and he saw what they couldn't. He saw himself, lost, unwanted, discarded. She wiped the blood from her lip and tried to fix her dress. "I'll be on my way," she said to the mob, her voice shaking just a little. As she turned to leave, Tommy Garrett made a choice that would light a fire in Redemption Creek that would smolder for decades. He reached out, and he took her hand. Gas rippled through the crowd. "Tommy, no!" someone called out. "You don't understand what she is." Oh, but he did. He understood perfectly. She was someone the world had decided wasn't worth saving, just like him. The only difference was she was big enough to fight back, and maybe, just maybe, she was lonely enough to want someone to fight for. Scarlet Mai stared at the small, grimy hand holding hers. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of recognition. The town had thrown this child away, just like they'd thrown her away. And in a world that had given him nothing, he was choosing her. "Come on then," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They walked down Main Street together, whispers and glares following them like a plague. But Tommy didn't let go. For the first time in 3 days, he wasn't alone, and he had a feeling he'd just found the one person in the world who was just as dangerous as he was. Scarlet Me's room above the saloon wasn't much. It was smaller than the jail cell Tommy had been sleeping next to, but it was clean. It smelled like lavender soap, not stale whiskey. There was a real bed with quilts, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a single window that looked out over a dirty alley. To Tommy, it was a palace. He watched her reflection as she poured water into a basin. Her hands shook as she dabbed a cloth at her swollen lip. Her eyes kept darting to the door, like she was expecting the whole world to come crashing in. "Are you scared?" Tommy asked. She paused, cloth halfway to her face. He expected a lie. Adults always lied to children, but she just met his gaze in the mirror and nodded. "Every day," she admitted. She turned and knelt so they were eye to eye. "But less so now that you're here." She smiled for real then, and it changed everything about her face. "I'm Scarlett Me Winters. If you're staying with me, we need some rules." The rules were simple. No going to bed hungry, no lying to each other, and no matter what anyone said, they stuck together. "Can you do that?" she asked, holding out her pinky finger. He'd never made a promise like this before. He linked his finger with hers and felt something solid settle in his chest. Belonging. That night she made soup from a single potato and a scrap of salt pork. She gave him the bigger portion. As they ate by candlelight, she told him stories of faraway cities with buildings that scraped the sky. For a little while, Tommy forgot about the judgmental town just below their feet. But peace doesn't last long in a place like Redemption Creek. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. The door shook with a heavy fist. "Open up, Scarlett! Town council wants a word." It was Sheriff Morrison. Scarlett's face went pale, but she squared her shoulders and opened the door. There stood the sheriff, Reverend Walsh, Mayor Hutchkins, and Dr. Bradley, the four most respected men in town. "This has gone too far," the Reverend declared, pushing into the tiny room. His eyes landed on Tommy and hardened into chips of ice. "That boy belongs in a proper Christian home, not here. We've arranged for him to go to the territorial orphanage in Phoenix," the mayor added, his face red with self-importance. "Stage leaves tomorrow." Orphanage. The word was a death sentence. Tommy had heard the stories. Kids worked like slaves, beaten for nothing, forgotten by God and man. He looked at Scarlett, his eyes pleading. She stood before the four men, a lioness protecting her cub. "He's not going anywhere," she said, her voice dangerously low. "He chose me. I chose him. End of it." Dr. Bradley let out a cold, cruel laugh. "You think a woman like you has any right to a child? You're delusional. He needs moral instruction, something you know nothing about." The unspoken word hung in the air. A vile poison. Scarlett flinched, but she didn't break. She moved to stand between Tommy and the men, a living shield. "I may be what you say I am," she said quietly, "but I've never turned my back on someone who needed help. Can you say the same?" The sheriff shifted, his hand hovering over his gun belt out of nervous habit. "Be reasonable, Scarlett. What kind of future can he have here?" That's when Tommy found his voice, a small, fierce sound that cut through the tension like a razor. "I won't go," he said, staring each man down. "She's good to me. She feeds me and doesn't call me names. If you take me away, I'll just run back." He took a breath, looked at the tears streaming down Scarlett's face, and delivered the killing blow. "She's my mama now." The room exploded. The reverend sputtered about blasphemy. The mayor muttered about legal guardianship. Dr. Bradley's face turned a shade of purple usually reserved for week-old bruises. "You see? She's already corrupted him," he spat. But Tommy just stepped closer to Scarlett, his small hand finding hers again. The gesture was louder than any of their shouts. "Get out," Scarlett said, her voice shaking but firm. "This is my room, and Tommy is my family. You have no right." The mayor puffed up, ready to argue, but the sheriff stopped him. He'd been watching Tommy's face, and what he saw there gave him pause. "We'll be back with papers," Morrison said quietly. "The territorial judge will have the final say." He looked at Tommy, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "Son, children don't always know what's best." After they left, Scarlett collapsed into the chair by the window. Tommy climbed onto her lap, wrapping his arms around her neck. "They'll come back," she whispered, her voice full of despair. "They'll take you, and there's nothing I can do. I have no money, no rights." The fear in her voice ignited something in Tommy. He pulled back, his young eyes blazing. "Then we'll leave," he said simply. "Tonight, before they come back with their papers." Scarlett stared at him, shocked. Tommy, we can't just disappear. They'll hunt us down. Uncle Pete used to talk about California, Tommy pressed, his voice urgent. Said you could start over fresh. We could go there, Mama. We could be a real family. That word Mama broke through her fear. It was a promise. It was a prayer. It was everything. The thought of losing him now was like having her heart torn from her chest. It would be dangerous, she said slowly, testing the idea. We have no money, no supplies. But as she spoke, a wild hope began to flicker in her eyes. It was a desperate plan, a fool's hope, but it was better than no hope at all. Suddenly, a commotion from downstairs shattered the quiet. Angry voices, breaking glass, heavy boots thundering up the stairs. Scarlett pushed Tommy behind her just as the door burst open. It was Jake Morrison, the sheriff's worthless son, flanked by two of his drunken friends. They reeked of whiskey and malice. Well, well, Jake slurred, his eyes crawling over Scarlett, then landing on Tommy with pure contempt. Heard you've taken up playing house with orphan trash. That's a new low, even for you. Get out, Jake, Scarlett said. But her voice was different now. These weren't men who cared about the law or appearances. They were predators. Now that's no way to treat old friends, Jake sneered, reaching for her. She jerked back, but the tiny room was a trap. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, squeezing hard. And Tommy saw red. The 7-year-old boy launched himself at Jake Morrison like a cornered animal. His fists pounded against the man's legs. Don't touch my mama, he screamed, his voice raw with rage and terror. Jake cursed and backhanded him across the face. The crack of the blow echoed in the small room. Tommy went flying, his head hitting the wall with a sickening thud. In that instant, Scarlett Mie transformed. The fear vanished, replaced by a fury so absolute it was terrifying. She grabbed the heavy ceramic water pitcher from the washstand and brought it down on Jake's head with all her strength. It shattered, sending him stumbling back, blood pouring down his face. You touch that boy again, she snarled, her voice a low, deadly growl, and I will kill you. Even Jake's drunk friends took a step back. The look in her eyes was not of a victim. It was the look of a killer. Blood streamed into Jake's eyes, but his focus was sharp now, lethal. You crazy bitch, he roared. Nobody hits a Morrison and gets away with it. He lunged, but she was ready. The broken handle of the pitcher was now a jagged weapon in her hand. She slashed out, catching him across the cheek, opening a gash that would scar him for life. He howled in pain and fury. The three men stumbled out, Jake clutching his bleeding face. This ain't over, he snarled from the doorway. Tomorrow morning, you and that brat will be gone from this town, one way or another. My daddy has rules. I don't. The threat hung in the air, colder than a grave. After they were gone, Scarlett rushed to Tommy's side, her hands shaking as she gently touched the dark bruise already blooming on his cheek. I'm so sorry, baby, she whispered, guilt and rage warring in her eyes. This is my fault. Tommy caught her hand. His small face was impossibly serious. No, Mama, he said firmly. This is their fault. He looked toward the window where the last light was dying. But you're right. We can't stay. They'll keep coming back. And next time, they wouldn't just be making threats. Scarlett knew he was right. Staying meant the orphanage for Tommy and something far worse for her at the hands of Jake Morrison. It wasn't a choice. It was an escape. Pack light, she said, her voice steady now, hard as steel. Only what we need. We leave when the moon sets. Tommy nodded. He understood. They were crossing a line. Once they ran, they could never come back. They would be outlaws, fugitives. But as he watched Scarlett sew her meager savings, $17.32, into the lining of her coat, he felt no fear. Only a fierce, burning loyalty to the woman who was willing to face the entire world for him. They waited. The saloon below finally fell silent. The town slept. Scarlett shouldered a small canvas bag. Tommy clutched a little wooden horse his uncle had carved, the only piece of his old life he had left. Ready? She whispered. He nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. They crept down the back stairs out into the alley. The night air was cold, scented with sagebrush and the promise of rain. They were ghosts slipping through the sleeping town. They'd made it 3 blocks when the first shot rang out. It wasn't aimed at them. The gunfire erupted from Main Street, followed by shouts. Torches flared to life, casting wild, dancing shadows. Scarlett yanked Tommy into the darkness between two buildings, her hand clamped over his mouth. Through the gap, they saw them. A mob. "Spread out!" It was Jake Morrison's voice, thick with whiskey but deadly serious. "They can't have gotten far. I want them found before sunrise." More men joined the hunt. Their voices echoed off the storefronts. And in that moment, Scarlett and Tommy understood the terrifying truth. They weren't just running away. They were being hunted. "The old mine shaft," Scarlett breathed in his ear, her voice barely a whisper. "Behind the cemetery. We can hide there." It was their only chance. They moved through the back alleys, their hearts pounding in time with the distant shouts of the hunting party. The cemetery sat on a hill, its crooked headstones like skeletal fingers, reaching for the moon. Tommy had always been scared of this place, but tonight, the dead felt far less threatening than the living. They found the mine entrance, a dark maw hidden behind a tangle of weeds. Scarlett crawled through the narrow opening, pulling Tommy in after her into the cold, musty dark. The air was stale, but it was safe. It was a tomb to hide them from the monsters outside. They huddled together, listening to the sounds of the search party echoing through the town. Tommy could feel Scarlett shivering beside him. "Mama," he whispered, "are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby," she whispered back, her arms a steel band around him. "We're going to be just fine." She was lying, but it was the most beautiful lie he had ever heard. But their sanctuary wasn't as safe as they thought. As the first gray light of dawn crept over the desert, they heard voices. Close. Too close. Jake Morrison and two of his men were right outside, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. "Check every hole, every cave," Jake snarled. "They've gone to ground somewhere close, like rats." Scarlett's hand flew to Tommy's mouth, stifling his breath. A beam of lantern light pierced the darkness of the shaft, sweeping across the damp rock just feet from where they hid. Tommy's heart stopped. The footsteps grew closer. They were trapped. "What about this old mine?" one of the men asked. The light grew brighter, probing the darkness. Scarlett gathered Tommy closer, ready to shield him with her own body. This was it. The end. And then, a different voice cut through the morning air, sharp with authority. "Jake Morrison, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" It was Dr. Bradley. The men outside froze. "Your father sent me," the doctor said, his voice laced with irritation. "There's been an accident at the mill. 2 men hurt badly. We need every hand we can get, not this foolishness chasing shadows." Jake argued. "They're here, Doc. I know it." "The mill, Jake. Now," Dr. Bradley commanded. "Those men could die." The voices moved away. The lantern light faded. They were gone, saved by an accident, or something that sounded like one. They stayed hidden long after the voices disappeared, not daring to breathe. Finally, when the normal sounds of the town drifted up from below, Scarlett spoke, her voice cracked and raw. "We can't stay here. They'll be back." Tommy nodded. The daylight terrified him, but he trusted her. "Where do we go?" "There's an old line shack 5 miles north," she said, thinking out loud. "It's a risk traveling in the day, but we have to." Tommy squared his shoulders. "I can do anything if you're with me, Mama." The simple faith in his voice was a knife in her heart. This boy had chosen her. She would walk through fire before she let him down. They slipped out of the mine, the morning sun blindingly harsh. They moved like fugitives, following dry creek beds, every snap of a twig making them freeze. The line shack was barely standing, a skeleton of weathered boards. But it was shade. It was cover. They collapsed inside, sharing the last of their water in a crust of bread. As Tommy slept, Scarlett kept watch. She saw dust clouds in the distance. Riders, or just the wind? Their food was gone. Their water was almost gone. And the railroad tracks, their only hope, were still 2 days away. As the sun began to set, they prepared to move again. Tommy's lips were cracked. Scarlett's hands trembled with exhaustion. But they had to go on. Freedom was just over the next ridge. They hadn't been walking an hour when they heard them. Horses, moving fast. Scarlett yanked Tommy behind a cluster of boulders, just as 4 horsemen crested the hill. It was Jake Morrison, his face a mask of fury, and behind him, his men and his father, the sheriff. "Fresh prints," one of the riders called out, pointing to the ground. "Can't be more than an hour ahead." Jake's face split into a cruel grin. They were caught. There was no escape. The desert was wide open, and their trail was as clear as writing on a page. Scarlet Mee closed her eyes. She made a decision, the hardest one of her life. She pressed her lips to Tommy's ear, her whisper a desperate final command. "When I say run, you go toward those rocks on the other side of the valley. Don't look back. Don't stop. And don't wait for me." Tommy's eyes went wide with horror. "No, Mama! We stick together! That was the rule!" Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was hard. "New rule," she whispered, her hand checking the small knife she carried. "Sometimes loving someone means being brave in different ways. Your job is to get to safety. My job is to give you the time to do it." She kissed his forehead. "Be brave, my sweet boy, and remember your mama loves you more than life itself." Before he could argue, she stood up. She stepped out from behind the boulder and shouted, her voice ringing across the desert. "Looking for me, gentlemen?" Every head snapped in her direction. Every horse wheeled towards her. Jake spurred his mount forward, his hand dropping to his gun. "Well, well, Scarlet Mai. Decided to face the music?" His voice was thick with triumph. "Where's your little bastard?" "He's long gone," she lied, backing away from Tommy's hiding spot. "Smart boy. Knew when to cut his losses." It was a brilliant performance, drawing them further away. But the sheriff was no fool. His eyes scanned the landscape. "Jake, take Henderson and circle those boulders. If the boy's close, that's where he'll be." Scarlett's eyes locked with Tommy's. A silent, frantic message passed between them. And then she screamed, a sound that ripped from the very depths of her soul. "Run, Tommy! Run now!" And then she was moving, not away, but toward them. The small knife in her hand flashed in the dying light as she launched herself at Jake Morrison's horse. The animal reared, screaming in panic. Jake cursed, fighting for control, and Tommy ran, his legs pumped, carrying him out from behind the rocks across the open ground. Behind him, there were shouts. A gunshot cracked through the air. Scarlett's voice raised in a cry of defiance and pain. Every part of him wanted to turn back, but her words echoed in his head. "Be brave. Your mama loves you." A bullet whizzed past his ear. Another kicked up sand at his feet. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to wound him, to drag him back. He reached the far rocks just as they pulled Scarlett down, her hands bound, Jake's hand cracking across her face. Tommy bit his tongue to keep from crying out, the taste of blood and tears filling his mouth. "Where is he?" Jake snarled, yanking her hair, forcing her to look at the rocks where Tommy hid. "Call him back, or I'll make you regret being born." Scarlett smiled, a bloody, beautiful, defiant smile. "Go to hell, Jake Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clear across the desert. "That child is worth more than this whole godforsaken town, and I will never help you destroy him." The sheriff's voice was cold. "Enough, Jake. We'll find him." They started to spread out. It was over. There was nowhere left to run. But then a new sound cut through the evening air. The sharp, piercing blast of a train whistle. It was close. Closer than he dared to hope. Black smoke billowed against the darkening sky. Salvation. Tommy took one last look at Scarlet Mee. Her head held high, her eyes blazing, even as they dragged her away. He memorized her face, her courage, her love. Then he turned and ran again, not towards cover, but towards the sound of that whistle. He ran with every ounce of strength he had, fueled by her sacrifice. Behind him, the posse erupted in shouts. They'd seen him, but Tommy didn't look back. He just ran, carrying her love with him, a burning torch in the darkness. She had given him a chance. It was up to him to be worthy of it. The train was a thundering monster of iron and steam, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. Hoofbeats were closing in behind him, Jake Morrison screaming curses that were swallowed by the roar of the engine. Tommy had one chance, a single, impossible chance. He saw it, an empty boxcar, its door slid halfway open, a moving target, a deadly gamble. He ran alongside, the gravel tearing at his worn-out shoes. He reached for the iron ladder. His fingers slipped. He fell, rolling away from the massive, grinding wheels with just inches to spare. He scrambled up and tried again. This time his hand caught, but his grip wasn't strong enough. The train was too fast, too powerful. "There he is!" Jake's voice. He was at the tracks, trying to aim his pistol, his horse shying away from the locomotive. Time was up. Tommy made one last desperate lunge. He threw his whole body at the ladder. Both hands found a grip. The momentum slammed him against the side of the car, knocking the wind from his lungs. He dangled there, his feet dragging, his small hands slipping. He was going to fall. He was going to die. And then a pair of strong hands grabbed his wrists. He was hauled upwards, pulled through the open door, and deposited in a heap on the wooden floor of the boxcar. He lay there gasping, shaking, the world a dizzying blur. When his vision cleared, he was looking up into a weathered face, framed by graying hair and the kindest eyes he had ever seen. "Easy there, son," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe now." Through the open door, Tommy saw the riders shrinking into the distance, Jake Morrison shaking a futile fist at the departing train. He was free. He was safe. But the relief was instantly drowned by a tidal wave of grief. "My mama," he sobbed, the words tearing from his chest. "They have my mama. I left her." The man's expression darkened. His name was Frank Cassidy. He was a former soldier, a man who had lost his own family and had been riding the rails ever since, a ghost on the move. He gripped Tommy's shoulders. "Son, listen to me," Frank said, his voice firm but gentle. "What you did back there wasn't running away. It was honoring her sacrifice. She wanted you free. Don't you dare dishonor that gift by thinking you failed her." As the train rattled on through the night, carrying them west, Frank shared his meager food and his own story of loss. He asked Tommy where he was going. "I don't know," Tommy admitted, the dream of California now a painful memory. "I don't know anyone. Anywhere." Frank looked at the boy, at the dirt and tears, and the impossible bravery in his eyes. "Well," he said slowly, "it so happens I was heading up to Oregon. Work in the lumber camps. They don't ask too many questions up there." He paused. "If you wanted company, I wouldn't mind having someone to talk to besides the wind." It wasn't just an offer of company, it was an offer of a new life, a new family. As dawn broke over mountains Tommy had never seen, he asked the question that had been haunting him all night. "Will I ever see her again?" Frank was quiet for a long time. "Maybe not in this life, son," he said honestly. "But a love like that, it doesn't just disappear. It lives on in you, in the man you become. Your mama's love is part of you now, forever, and nobody can ever take that away." In that moment, a promise took root in Tommy's soul. He would become a man she would be proud of. He would carry her love like a shield, and he would spend his life helping others who, like him, had been thrown away by the world. The boy named Tommy Garrett had died in the desert. The young man who rode that train toward a new dawn would be someone else entirely, someone forged in fire and sacrifice, someone who understood that the family you choose is the only one that truly matters. 23 years later, a man stood on the platform of the Redemption Creek railway station. He was tall, dressed in a fine coat, his face etched with a quiet strength that made people look twice. His name was Thomas Cassidy, a name he'd taken in honor of the man who had raised him. He was a ghost, returned to the place that had tried to erase him. In his pocket was a telegram. Jake Morrison was dead, killed in a saloon brawl. His father, the old sheriff, had died of a broken heart just hours later. But that wasn't what had brought Thomas back. It was a lawyer's letter that had arrived with the news. A letter that had shattered his world. It contained a single impossible fact. Scarlett Mee Winters was alive. After 23 years of grieving her, of building a life on the foundation of her sacrifice, he learned the truth. She hadn't died in that desert. She was here, in this town, waiting. The knowledge was a physical blow, a cocktail of joy and terror that stole his breath. He walked down Main Street. The town was smaller, sadder than he remembered. Old-timers saw a flicker of something familiar in his eyes, but none of them saw the ghost of the orphan boy. He found the house on Willow Street. It was small, neat, with a white picket fence. A home built on decades of quiet resilience. His hand trembled as he reached for the latch. 23 years of grief. 23 years of love. It all came down to this door. She opened it before he could knock. She was older, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the story of her life. But her green eyes were exactly the same. They were the eyes of the woman who had saved him. Tommy, she whispered. The name was a key, unlocking a part of his heart he thought had been sealed forever. My sweet boy, look how tall you've grown. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. She was real. She was alive. All the schools he'd built, all the children he'd saved, all the success he'd achieved in her name. None of it mattered as much as this single, miraculous moment. Mama, he choked out, the word a prayer he hadn't realized he was still holding. He closed the distance between them and gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the entire world. She felt smaller, but her arms around his neck were just as strong. 23 years of absence vanished in an instant. He was home. Inside, over tea, she told him her story. The sheriff had held her for 3 days, then released her with a warning to never return. She had walked to the next town, penniless, and started over. A seamstress, a cook. Slowly, painstakingly, she built a new life. I wrote letters, she said, her voice thick with old pain. Hundreds of them, to every town between here and the coast. I was looking for a boy named Tommy Garrett, but you had vanished. He told her about Frank Cassidy, about the new name, the lumber camps in Oregon, and the foundation he'd built in her honor. I came back 10 years ago, she said quietly. I'd saved enough to buy this house. I thought maybe one day you'd come looking for me. I wanted to be where you'd find me. He had to ask the question that had haunted his nightmares. Jake Morrison, what did he do to you? Her eyes clouded for a moment. He hurt me, she said simply, but he didn't break me. And every time he did, it just reminded me that you were free. You became everything I dreamed you could be, Tommy. They talked all night, bridging a 23-year gap with stories of two lives lived apart, but forever connected. As the clock struck midnight, she asked the question that hung between them, full of a lifetime of hope. Will you stay? He smiled, and in his face, she saw the same brave little boy who had taken her hand in the street. Mama, he said, I've spent 23 years building something worth coming home to. Now I want to spend the rest of my life building something worth staying for. Together. The very next day, the work began. Construction crews arrived. Wagons of lumber clogged Main Street. Thomas Cassidy began buying up the dilapidated buildings, his vast fortune a weapon he now wielded with surgical precision. The Cassidy Foundation was born, a brick-and-mortar testament to a promise made by a boy on a train. He was bringing more than money to Redemption Creek. He was bringing a reckoning. You're making enemies, Scarlett warned him one evening. Mrs. Patterson is saying you're trying to destroy the town's character. The new sheriff is asking where all your money came from. Thomas just smiled. Let them ask. The best revenge is a life well lived. The first test came in the form of a 12-year-old boy named Billy Chen. He collapsed on the foundation steps, bruised and terrified. His parents, who had run the general store, were dead. He was an orphan. And just like Tommy all those years ago, the town had turned its back. Mrs. Patterson says she won't take in no Chinese orphan, Billy gasped. Says it ain't proper. Thomas knelt down, looking into a face that was a mirror of his own past. Billy Chen, he said, his voice gentle but unbreakable. You are not alone anymore. Welcome to your new home, son. The town's reaction was immediate and ugly. A mob of concerned citizens, led by Mrs. Patterson and a now stooped Dr. Bradley, gathered outside the foundation. This is an outrage, Mrs. Patterson screeched. Bad enough that woman corrupted one child. Now he thinks he can force his foreign charity cases on us. Thomas emerged, Billy's hand held firmly in his. Scarlett stood right behind them, her chin high, a queen surveying her conquered territory. We know who you really are, boy. Dr. Bradley scoffed. We know where you came from. The moment had arrived, the final confrontation. Thomas looked at the angry, fearful faces, the same faces that had shunned him, and he felt not anger, but a profound pity. You're right, Doctor, Thomas said, his voice ringing out, clear and steady. You do know where I came from. I am Tommy Garrett, the orphan you all threw away, the boy who was saved by the woman you called a whore. A shocked silence fell over the crowd. I am also the man who has built schools and orphanages for over 200 children the world had written off, he continued, his voice rising with power. I am the son who came home to honor the woman who taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about choosing to stand with someone when the whole world is against them. Trash raised by trash, Mrs. Patterson spat, her face pale with fury. That boy belongs in a proper Christian home. Before Thomas could respond, little Billy Chen stepped forward. Ma'am, he said, his voice quiet but carrying with perfect clarity. I've been in your proper home. You fed me scraps and made me sleep in the shed. Mr. Cassidy gave me a warm bed and more kindness in one afternoon than I got in 2 weeks with you. The boy's words were a slap in the face to every person there. The ugly truth of their charity was laid bare. The crowd began to shift, to mutter, to look away in shame. Thomas placed a proud hand on Billy's shoulder. This is what the foundation stands for, he announced to the crumbling mob. Children like Billy, children like I was, deserve more than your scraps. They deserve a chance, and whether you approve or not, they are going to get it. He put his arms around Scarlett and Billy, 3 generations of outcasts, now an unbreakable fortress. The boy who was worthless had become a king. The fallen woman had become a matriarch, and the rejected child had found his voice. Come on, Thomas said, turning them toward the brightly lit doors of the foundation. Let's go home. Inside, safe from the judgment of the world, they were a family, forged not by blood, but by choice, living proof that sometimes the people the world throws away are the only ones who can build it back up again, better than it was before. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and believe that the family we choose can be the strongest of all, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep finding incredible stories just like this one.